Now, we are in Daniel chapter 1, verse 18. This is Discovering the Scriptures with Dr. Peter John Parisis. We're going to change it up this morning a little bit. We're going to go ahead and do the translation from the Hebrew direct into English without proper sentence structure first. And they should be brought in, the king had said, when of the days. Now at the end, Nebuchadnezzar, before of the eunuchs, the chief, and brought them in. Now that is the direct translation without putting an English structure. Now we're going to go ahead and read the King James Version first. Quote, now at the end of the days that the king had said, he should bring them in. Then the prince of the eunuchs brought them in before Nebuchadnezzar. Now we're going to go ahead and we're going to look at some other versions here. We can't use the English Standard Version because that is copyrighted, I discovered this morning. So we're not going to use that so we don't violate their copyright. The RSV, quote, at the end of the time when the king had commanded that they should be brought in, the chief of the eunuchs brought them in before Nebuchadnezzar. Now let's look at the Young Zidler translation. Quote, and at the end of the days that the king had said to bring them in doth the chief of the eunuchs before Nebuchadnezzar. Now let's go ahead and look at the Geneva version of the Bible. Quote, now when the time was expired that the king had appointed to bring them in, the chief of the eunuchs brought them before Nebuchadnezzar. Unquote. Now let's go ahead and take a look at this verse, and let's go ahead and see what we have as far as when we parse this out. Okay, from the Hebrew. Now at the end of the days that the king had said. Now let's look at the Hebrew word for had said. All these other words were not unique. They had been used a couple times from Daniel in his book, the same way they're used now. So had said is a quell stem. So as you remember, that's a casual action. And it's a perfect aspect, which means that this is expressed as a completed action. So had said, so it's a casual completed action. He should bring, so let's parse that out. It is a hipophil stem, and it is an infinitive aspect. So it's a causative action of the quell. And then this one, it is used as an ing. So that means that he should bring them in. So bringing them in. Okay. Then the prince. So he should bring them in. Then the prince of the eunuchs. So remember, the prince could be the chief, the captain, given name. It's the person in charge of the eunuchs. Brought, now let's parse that Hebrew word out. It's hypophil stem, the causative action, and it's an imperfect aspect, which means that it's incomplete. So, brought. So the eunuch brought. So he had brought them in before Nebuchadnezzar. This is a pretty straightforward verse when you're looking at how to translate and get meaning from it in order to go forward with understanding what the verse means. So let's take a look and see what some of the commentaries have to say about this verse. Now this is a pretty straightforward verse, so let's read John Gill's commentary on it, see what he has to say. Quote, now at the end of the days the king had said he should bring them in. That is, at the end of 3 years, which was the time appointed for their education. And when they were brought in before the king for his examination and approbation. Then the prince of the eunuchs brought them in before Nebuchadnezzar, even all the young men that were taken from among the children of Israel and Judah, as well as the 4 children before and after mentioned, appears by what follows. This was done by Aspenaz and not Melzar. Now Melzar was the person in charge of the meat and drinks, and that's the name given like a manager. Aspenaz, that is the name of the actual person that we know of as the chief or the captain or the prince of the eunuchs. Now, that's the end of John Gill. At the end of this 3-year time frame, the king wants to see them. Now, during this time, these guys had to go ahead and learn the Chaldean language, because they spoke Hebrew, and they were brought into this country. Then, not only did they have to learn this language, they had to learn all the idioms and all the things that were brought in from other cultures that were assimilated into this Chaldean language and into their world aspect. So they had to learn all these things, and they had to read up on the clay tablets and maybe the Parisis and maybe animal hide, but we do know for the clay tablets for sure from what we have on the evidence that were left over from that time frame. They had to do all this. So what did they learn? How much did they know? Are they worthy to stand in the king's presence? Now remember that Daniel and his friends have been on a vegetarian diet during this whole thing. No meat, no wine, and water. Now, these young men been castrated and become eunuchs, like some suppose, but Scripture does not give us this. Then they would have had to have gone through that and healed up and got over their anger and learned the language and everything else also within 3 years. That seems to be pretty far stretched as far as making it to be the top of the class here. So my personal thought is, since the Scripture doesn't give us that they were actually castrated, doesn't give us that they're actually from the king's house, and that Daniel himself calls them the children of Judah, I'm going to go ahead and go with that they were children of Judah, they were not from the prince's house, and that they were not castrated. Now, we don't have anything personal about Daniel's life. We don't know if he was married or not, at least up to this point. So all speculation about, well, he was castrated, so therefore he's a eunuch, so there would be no need of a wife and children. That's why we don't know anything about that. That's a lot of assumptions. So we don't have all that, and this is discovering the Scriptures. So we're going to go along with what Scripture says, not any guessing games, because that is not being smart, and it's not too much wisdom there. So since the Scripture gives us information, we'll go forward, and what it does not give us, we will not speculate. We will bring up what some of the commentaries in them are saying, and why we do not go along with them and support them, or that it could be a possibility. This is for you to make up your own mind. There is no evidence, though, that Daniel and his friends were castrated. What we do know now is that they're now standing before the king after a 3-year fast, having to learn the language, having to learn the culture, all the idioms, because there's been a huge assimilation of nations here, because Nebuchadnezzar conquered a lot. And so now he wants them to be wise. So let's see what goes on. May God richly bless you as you continue your studies of the Scriptures.